research affiliate at Carleton, and I have been involved in this project for the past, in this project and its predecessor for the past 6 years. I'd say so since about 2011. And today I will be talking about the development of extreme weather indicators, the crop-specific extreme weather indicators, and the use of climate data in the Eastern Ontario vision model. Now, to a large extent, the focus of this project was on weather extremes, and as Scott mentioned earlier today, we can most people think about extremes as catastrophic events like flash floods and severe droughts that affect large areas. The approach that we have taken here is a bit different in that we looked at extreme events that are not necessarily catastrophic, but that tend to affect crops if in a severe, significant way if they occur at specific crop growth stages. And so the general idea was to look at a crop's growth curve, and so here you see a growth curve for corn showing all the different stages, development stages that it goes through. Looking at this curve, we try to identify the periods at which the crop is particularly susceptible to extremes. And what we have found is that in the early vegetative stages, so shortly after planting, corn is susceptible to flooding and can be really adversely affected by it. As we get into the early reproductive stages, it's the drought that is of most concern, and then toward the end of the growth cycle, just before maturity, it's the frost that can really affect the yield negatively. Now, to be able to work with to analyze crop-specific extremes, we needed climate data, and we looked at both historic and projected future data. So for historic data, given that the analysis of extremes is sensitive to the presence of missing values, we used in-field data sets for minimum and maximum temperature and precipitation for a select number of weather stations in the area. So the data ranged from, so it went from 1961 to 2010. We used Environment Canada's Weather Archive as the base, and then the methodology of Dr. Schroeder and Associates to perform the infilling. And basically, the idea was to use surrogate stations to estimate missing values at target stations using long-term climatic relationships between data series. And those long-term relationships resulted in defined differences for temperature and ratios for precipitation that were used to adjust data from surrogate stations and create infill data for target stations. For projected data, we used high-resolution downscale daily temperature and precipitation data for an ensemble of 12 models under the RCP 8.5. And the data were from 2011 to 2035, developed at Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium. And originally, the data were downloaded as .NET-CDF files from their website, and then converted to CSV files to be used in our Envision model. And there was a Python script developed to extract data for weather stations of interest and from the .NET-CDF files and convert them to CSV files. So when you are working with Envision and trying to set up a run, you are able to select any of the 12 climate models that we processed data for, and then select the range of years for which you want to run the model. And even though the original data were available for up to the year 2100, given that farmers are mostly interested in a shorter term perspective, in the model we only included 30 years of data, so going from 2011 to 2040. And here it's an example of how of the script that's used by Envision to select appropriate data based on the model of interest. Now, I already mentioned that we used weather data for a number of representative weather stations in the area. In fact, we selected 6 weather stations to represent each of the 6 eco-districts located in the study area. And to determine whether the stations are representative of the entire area of the eco-districts, we looked at changes in mean and extreme temperature and total and extreme precipitation. And we compared the changes between a potential representative station and the rest of the stations located in the same eco-district. And we did some correlation analysis and have found that for temperature, correlations were consistently high, above 0.9, and for precipitation, there was a bit more of a range, but it never went below 0.74. So, and that's correlation between the representative stations that were selected and then all the other available weather stations in that eco-district. Now, why did we use station data as opposed to gridded data? First of all, it made it possible to avoid some issues related to reduced signal of extreme events, so these issues are known to occur when averaging and interpolating of weather data occurs. But that said, we're now in the process of adding gridded data to the system and into the data repository, so that it was possible to do model runs and then compare results of runs that use weather station data and gridded data. And I will talk a little more about that toward the end of my presentation. So here are the original stations that we looked at, and the stations that were considered to be representative had to have at least 25 years of data prior to 2010, and in cases where no consistent long record was available, we within an eco-district we used weather stations from neighboring eco-districts to represent the eco-district in question. And here in red are the 6 weather stations that have been selected, and for each IDU an attribute was created in the attribute table corresponding to the weather station representing an eco-district where the IDU is located. And in cases where an IDU was located in more than one, so when the more than one eco-district, when it was kind of split, then we used the largest area principle and assigned it to the eco-district where most of the IDU was located. So coming back to the idea of indicator development, and I'm talking about crop-specific indicator development, we conducted an extensive literature review along with expert consultations to identify crop tolerance thresholds to different temperature and precipitation conditions at various phenological stages, and also looked at yield loss percentages associated with threshold exceedance. And extreme events that result in potential losses of 20% or more were considered further, which allowed us to identify 8 corn-specific indices shown in this table here. The ones in green were found to not be very common historically, so they only occurred between 1 and 3 times in the entire historic period we looked at, whereas the ones in red were significantly more common and are the ones that we paid a bit more attention to in our work. For soybeans, we identified 11 indicators, and of those, there were 3 that occurred with that occurred frequently enough to warrant further and more detailed analysis. Now, this flowchart is something that you have already seen earlier today in Dan's presentation, and basically the way Envision works with crop-specific indices is once the conditions are identified as suitable for planting, a planting event occurs, and then from that time a crop okay. I think I may be able to to make it. So basically, once the crop has been planted, it starts going through crop development stages, and then for each stage, if there's a corresponding crop-specific extreme event in our list of indicators, then a threshold is calculated, and if it has been reached, then or exceeded, then yield is reduced. Now, at the end of each model run, and you have seen this before, a number of output tables are produced, and for crop-specific events, we're interested in the pivot table, and then the farm model crop events table. The pivot table just shows any event that occurred in each of the IDUs, and the farm model crop event table lists. Actually, as you can see, it lists all of the indicators and shows the number of hectares that were affected by a particular extreme in Eastern Ontario. And so while not showing up in the post-run results directly, table data can be used to create all kinds of maps and graphs to make the results more visually clear. As you can see here, we're looking at springtime weather extremes for corn, poor sitting conditions, and early flooding. And so these maps were created using data from the output tables produced by Envision. We can see some variability and increases in wet conditions over the past years. So in the top row, for example, for poor sitting conditions, the first map shows data from 1961 to 85, then the second one is 85 to 2010, and then the last one is the future projections, so from 2010, in this case to 2035, so each map covers a 25-year period. So we can see that in the past, number of flooding events and poor sitting condition events has been increasing, but in the future, according to a particular model shown here, it is expected to somewhat decrease, but with significant variability. If we graph data to be able to see not 25-year averages, but interannual variability, you can see that if we look at all of the models, there is quite a bit of noise there and a lot of variability. Depending on model biases, some are more prone to project dry years, others are wet weather bias, which results, again, as I said, in significant differences between the models. Aside from crop-specific indices, Envision also does additional calculations of generic weather extremes, more generic weather extremes like growing season length and the number of extreme heat and extreme cold events. Some of which are you can see here in this in this screenshot of the script, these are once you run the model, this can be either plotted or mapped, and you can see that in some of the output post-run results. As far as using climate data and further refining crop-specific indicators, we looked at, for the future, we looked at using gridded data to enable indicator calculation at a finer spatial scale than weather stations allow, then refining indicators by incorporating soil moisture and evapotranspiration calculations in formulas, and then developing indicators for a wider variety of commonly grown crops. Because for now we mostly we focused on corn and soy and to some extent alfalfa, but the indicators can definitely be developed for a range of crops. And then analyzing indicator performance using historic production data is one of things that is of interest. And so just to illustrate, going from weather station data to gridded data, so that would allow us to go from just 6 points on the landscape to over 130, which would be a significant improvement in how data, in spatial distribution. Thank you. And
thank you.
I think I managed to wrap it up in under 10 minutes.
Questions, comments for Anna?
Yes.
So your PKIC data, that's for future, or did you get it for past?
It's for the future.
It's just for future?
Yeah. But we, so we use their data for the future, but we do use, CFS data. For gridded data, it's...
So their 10-kilometer grid is the 10-kilometer grid that originally Andy's group chose to do the existing weather data across Canada.
Yeah, we have an existing NRCan 10-kilometer grid.
Yeah, that's the same grid.
So in the future, we're going to be able to get PKIC data based on that grid.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we'll be able to get hard number, so-called historical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's being processed, maybe even as we speak, the data, and so it's probably a matter of maybe a couple of weeks until it's all processed and ready to be.
But the data you showed today, that was
that's station
with the existing stations that you chose.
That's the station data, yeah.
For the future.
Yes. Well, the past and the future.
Yeah, so you gave them the points where the weather station exists, and then PKIT gave you a file.
Oh no, you just you download a netcdf file that has data for, well, basically for the entire area of interest, and then the script that was developed, the Python script, it extracts particular weather points.
It finds the grid that's closest to the weather station.
That contains.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what. Okay. I just had one other question regarding corn for the indices. I saw you had minimum nighttime temperatures above 24 for soybean, and I think corn has a very similar cardinal temperature around 25. There's a critical period when it's infilling the grain, so that could be added in there.
Yeah.
That was documented one year. I saw a presentation once in the Midwest where they had a drought and very high temperatures during a critical 2-week period, and it had a huge impact that year on yields in the Midwest.
All right, thank you, Anna.